Welcome everyone, I'm Grace Kuriakanja and this is Africa Matters. For nearly a year and a half, millions of people across Sudan have been battered by war and starvation. Now, heavy rains have triggered floods, leaving food trucks stuck and raising fears of waterborne diseases. The United Nations says all but 6 of Sudan's 18 states have been affected by floods, and at least 27,000 people have been uprooted from their homes since June. Just what does that mean for a country at war? So, Sudan's health ministry recently declared a cholera outbreak, and the conflict has forced most hospitals out of service, which means the war-torn nation is struggling to treat the more than 11,000 cholera patients.
If there is a suspected case of cholera, it is transferred to the emergency and isolation department. There, doctors are available 24 hours a day. The doctors classify the case and stabilize it. And if it is proven to be a case of infection, treatment begins immediately. If it is not, the patient returns home after being stabilized. The hospital here does not have the capacity to accept many cases.
But it's not just that. Listen, according to the United Nations, 50 people have died from cholera and almost 143,000 people in 12 of 18 states in Sudan have been affected, mostly in Khartoum, Jazeera, Kordofan and Darfur.
We've had heavy rain which has turned into flooding. All our houses have collapsed. Mine has been totally destroyed. We're sitting in the street with nowhere to go.
Floods have also cut off major roads and swept away bridges, making aid delivery difficult. The World Food Programme says more than 50 trucks loaded with about 4,800 metric tons of food and nutrition assistance, which is enough for about 500,000 people, are stuck. Now, in the midst of all that, the WFP says Sudan is also experiencing the world's largest hunger crisis.
25.6 million people are facing acute hunger. That's 54% of the population.
All right, let's hear more from Ashok Swine, who is a professor of peace and conflict research at Uppsala University in Sweden. Prof, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Right, now people in Sudan are already facing war and starvation, like we said there, and as if that's not enough, in came the floods. So what can be done to deal with these seasonal floods?
I think, as your initial report mentioned, Sudan is facing a dangerous cocktail, famine, flood, as well as uncontrolled internal conflict for over 16 months. And I think this is a number of deaths because of the flood have gone up more than 100, as far as the information I received today. So it's an extremely difficult situation there. The unfortunate part is even the international community, where the situation of Sudan has been totally underplayed in the global media because of the focus on Ukraine and Gaza. Still, whatever the assistance is being supplied, they are not being able to reach because there are a number of trucks which are aid trucks which are in the western front of the Sudan. They are not able to get in, even there is a flood area there. The internal conflicts and the violence which is going on in all the urban centers, which we have mentioned, there have been looting of the various aid supplies to inside. So it is a very, very dangerous situation. There is more than 25 million people before the flood were the food scarce. And now I think around 10 million internally displaced and 2 million have left the country. So this is an extremely dangerous situation even before the flood. And now the flood has made it much more worse.
Right, Prof. And you've painted a good picture of the situation. currently of the situation at hand. But the question again, Prof, is what should be done, what can be done to better deal with all of this? Because you reminded me of what MSF, Medicine Sans Frontiers, said a few weeks ago, where it was calling on international agencies to come back to Sudan and do more for the people of Sudan. So what should be done in light of all that you've painted for us, Prof?
This is a good question. The thing is, why Sudan is not on the map, global map, that what is happening. It's one of the, I think, probably the most difficult humanitarian situation Sudan is facing now. And we are missing it in the media internationally and policy-wise, internal policy-wise. So I think the first priority should be at this point to get a humanitarian ceasefire in that country. The parties, the external parties, those who are involved, supporting Sudanese armed forces, as well as the Sudanese paramilitary RSF, they should realize that they are playing a very, very dangerous game against the humans, the Sudanese civilian population. So they should stop this, at least get a ceasefire. Unless there is a ceasefire, that will be difficult for the other international humanitarian aid agencies, even if they want to, they come into. So I think it is an international opinion must be developed and put pressure on these international characters, those who are engaged in really fermenting the conflict between these two internal, the Sudanese armed forces and RSF.
Right. Okay, let's go back to the cholera outbreak, which was declared an outbreak by the Sudan's health ministry. So what are the challenges of dealing with that in the middle of a war, a bloody war, if I must say?
I think the last 16 months, almost all the hospitals have been destroyed. I mean, if you look at the kind of even the best hospitals in Khartoum, they are not anymore. I mean, even the mortar attacks on them, where patients were being treated for there before they had to leave. Many of the patients, those who were being treated in the hospital, they died because of the various lack of treatment. And now, I mean, how do you expect this? When there are no doctors, many of those who can, I know several of the doctors, those who have left the country after this conflict, there are no medical facilities in that place. So it's again, I think we need to have a certain kind of at least zones near the areas where we can create at least safe zones where the people medical help can be provided. But I think the people have been displaced several times within Sudan, and it is becoming extremely difficult when they're facing the conflict to move from one area to another area to save themselves because of the flood, because there is no transportation. So I think it is important that the conflict should come to an, or if the conflict, they don't make a humanitarian ceasefire all over the country, they should have somewhere some safe zone at least where the medicines and the international community can go and do something.
Right. It's actually the world's largest displacement crisis. And still on that, because you've talked about the medicines and what the people need here, let's talk more on aid delivery, which has been blocked first by the war and now by the floods. So what are the options for A, the people in need, and B, for the aid workers?
I think at this situation, as I mentioned, if they can stop the war, if they can create the safe zone, the only other possible help can be possibly airdrop the help. Then, the kind of things which we can do, even sometimes we have tried in Gaza, the international community can declare its a responsibility to protect, get into the area, create some safe zone itself, and airdrop the help, because otherwise we will be witnessing, if not millions, thousands people dying in the near future.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Ashok Swine, for your time and contribution.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Right, and we have more stories coming up for you here on Africa Matters, including...
I'm Isaac Kaleji here in Accra to tell you how credit downgrades affect African countries and their ability to borrow on the global market for development projects.
Global credit rating agencies often determine if African governments can borrow on the international markets to fund major projects. Positive ratings mean cheaper money, but in recent years, African nations have accused these agencies of bias, making it more expensive or even impossible for them to borrow. African countries now want their own credit rating agency as an alternative, as Isaac Kaleji reports from Accra.
Like many African countries, Ghana is struggling to provide basic social amenities and services for their citizens. The continent has a widespread shortage of things like good roads, drinkable water, electricity, hospitals, and schools. Despite several African countries attaining a middle-income status over the past 2 decades, international sources of funding have shrunk, forcing many governments to resort to borrowing from the international bond markets. But that has come at a huge cost.
If you go for $1 billion, the $1 billion is not going to create a new asset. Maybe about 30% of the $1 billion is going to be used to service the maturing old debt, and only 70% is left to do something. And by the time the 70% is finished, we have not finished the project. So you need to go and procure another debt to service. So we are in a cycle of creating refinancing of debt through procurement of bonds.
But to remain active on the bond markets, African economies must have favorable ratings from credit rating agencies like Moody's and Fitch. And that hasn't usually been the case.
Over the past 12 months, 15 out of 35 global credit downgrades were in Africa. That's 43% of all global downgrades, according to the insurance group Chassis. Over a quarter of all downgrades of sovereign bonds were in sub-Saharan Africa alone. That pushes up borrowing costs and affects their inability to raise enough money for major infrastructure investments.
Millions of Africans are still without jobs. The investment needed to create the job is limited, and several projects have stalled. African leaders have accused the credit rating agencies of bias, depriving them of the chance to borrow on the bond markets. Some analysts say these concerns are legitimate.
The challenge has been that the credit ratings have always been very biased, and the credit ratings are always usually written by analysts who are not even based in the country.
Since 2017, the African Peer Review Mechanism, APRM, an agency established under the African Union, has been working towards a Pan-African rating agency as an alternative to the private rating agencies, with a timeline of it becoming active in 2025. But will a Pan-African rating agency solve the problem?
We need to have good leadership that is conscious of good governance, and we also need to manage the economy properly. We need to put in fiscal buffers that are needed to manage the debt itself.
While the politics of credit ratings continue, ordinary citizens just want development projects that will raise their living standards. But there are no guarantees that will happen anytime soon. Isaac Kaleji, Africa Matters, Accra, Ghana.
And speaking of raising the standard of living, drivers for Uber and other ride-hailing firms in Kenya are trying to do just that. They're struggling with low fares, and as a result, some are raising prices beyond what the app permits, setting up a standoff between the workers and their companies. Rupert Stone has more.
Times are hard for Kenya's taxi drivers. Competition between local companies and ride-hailing firms Uber and Bolt has depressed prices, forcing drivers to charge higher fares.
The reason that brought us to this point where we are negotiating is how life is at the moment. You find that most of us are servicing loans, paying 2,000 Kenya shillings or $15 daily. I have children and a house to pay. Those are among some of the challenges. You move around with 200 shillings base fare, and 12 hours later, you still haven't gotten enough for the car loan and fuel. Things are not working, and we have no other way.
Kenyans are grappling with a toxic mix of high taxes, high prices and high interest rates, making it harder to survive on low wages. That hasn't stopped Uber from forcing its drivers to comply with the app's pricing levels. Kenya, with its large population and low level of car ownership, is one of the firm's major markets in Africa. Some passengers pay the higher fares. Others, however, do not, leaving the drivers with little option but to accept the lower rate.
Yeah, we have a chart. We show it to our clients. But if he doesn't agree, we do what the app is saying. Because after all, or at the end of the day, you have to work. Because your wife and your children at home knew daddy has gone to duty, is bringing something home. So if you refuse everything, then you better ship out of the business. But before we ship out of the business, we are trying to make the business better.
Local firm Faras is taking steps to protect its drivers and customers at the same time.
We have done a few changes to favor the drivers, but also we have brought about few issues to cushion the client against that. The first thing we have done is to move our minimum fare from 200 shillings currently to 240 shillings.
But it's a delicate balancing act and a problem that won't be resolved without a struggle. Rupert Stone, Africa Matters.
We head to West Africa now, where restrictions imposed last year by the world's top rice exporter, India, limiting sales on several rice varieties has caused a headache for countries like Ivory Coast. But a new rice variety is bringing in higher yields and profits for farmers, as Dominic Brian Omondi explains.
Rice farmer Kase Yao used to manage just one harvest a year, but that's all changed now.
Today the yield is better with this variety. We can get 4 or 5 tons per hectare. I can truly say that rice nourishes us today.
Ivory Coast hopes the new variety will reduce and eventually end its dependence on rice from India and other countries like Thailand and Pakistan. According to Hermane, this variety of rice is able to thrive despite frequent water shortages.
With this variety, we won't be talking about climate change. It's as if the weather has remained unchanged. When you plant it, whatever the weather, it adapts. It's good. It adapts to all climate.
Ivory Coast produces 1.4 million tons of rice per year, but it consumes 2.1 million, according to the country's Agency for the Development of the Rice Sector. In our projection for 2027, 3 years from now, we should be producing around 2.2 million tons of rice. But all this will depend on figures gathered by the National Statistics Institute, which will give us the level of consumption habits and the different varieties we consume. Based on these details, we will be able to make a good projection. The agency sees Ivory Coast being self-sufficient within the next 3 years.
This variety allows you to do 2 cycles in a single year, because the semi-harvest cycle is only 118 days. But if the farmer is really equipped with tractors or a power tiller, he can do up to 3 cycles in a year.
And things look promising as Kase, Hermane, and many other rice farmers hope for a boost to their yields and their pockets. Dominic Brian Omondi, Africa Matters.
Now, they are the quintessential beasts of burden, and in Mali's capital, Bamako, donkeys carry a particularly heavy load. Poor waste management by the government. Brenda Radido tells us how donkeys are helping clean up the capital city.
As motorcyclists jostle for space on the busy roads of Bamako, Yakoba Diallo uses his donkey cart to pick up trash in the neighborhood of Badalabogo. Nicknamed Kante and Keita, Diallo's donkeys help to clean up the streets every morning. They are more affordable than garbage trucks, and donkey carts owners can earn up to $165 a month from households that pay to use their services.
I want to do this work with a truck, but I don't have the means to buy one. So I use the donkeys and the carts. To the people in charge of waste, I ask them to remove the garbage from the dump sites so that I can do my work properly. The dump has become a mountain of garbage.
Once collected, the garbage is brought to Badalabogo dump, but the dump is poorly maintained and overflowing.
We manage the site here. We manage the money at the end of each month. This is our job. As you can see, the donkey carts come here, and we write down their names. The advantage of using donkey carts for this cannot be overestimated. We work with the donkey carts. A car cannot even access this place.
Mali State Waste Management Department has been accused of not doing its job in the capital. For a while, a Moroccan company was contracted to manage the solid waste of the city, but the contract was short-lived.
The institutions that must intervene and deal with the issue of waste management are not fully playing the role. For example, the state. The state must build the infrastructure, and among this infrastructure, there is a construction of landfills that must receive all the waste from the city of Bamako. Well, from independence until today, Bamako does not have operational landfills that meet the accepted standards.
Until the government finds a lasting solution, donkey car drivers like Diallo will be the only thing keeping the streets of Bamako from being overwhelmed by piles of garbage. Brenda Radido, Africa Matters.
We head to Southern Africa now, where poaching has threatened Zimbabwe's rich wildlife for decades. Last year, the country recorded more than 500 poaching cases. However, Rumesa Choda tells us that the transformation of one man from illegal hunter to conservationist is inspiring change.
Zimbabwe's Chiretsi district is known for its wildlife. But where there's wildlife, there's poaching, and authorities here have long battled to protect the diverse native animals. Tambanechko Mastic was once a notorious poacher, but he's now become a beacon of hope for his community.
I grew up as a hunter, and it's a trait that became intrinsic. Before game rangers eventually caught up with me in the animal reserve, hunting was our way of life, but we didn't know that we were committing a crime by killing animals.
He faced the consequences of his actions, spending nearly 3 months in prison. There, he learned new skills like weaving and carpentry through a rehabilitation program, and after his release, he launched a woodworking venture.
I was enlightened during my time of imprisonment and realized that I could make a living without hunting. These days, my main income comes from creating pieces of art which I sell to tourists. My workshop is at a public place, and anyone can admire my work whilst it's in progress.
The 47-year-old is also promoting alternative livelihoods and encourages his community to rely on farming and livestock rather than poaching.
I've tried to educate my fellow hunters and villagemen on the dangers of poaching. I pride myself in spreading knowledge on conserving wildlife. Some of my peers have been learning how to craft sculptures and chairs under my guidance.
Authorities say the number of poachers in his village has decreased over the years.
The greater part of Hwange National Park, we have not lost any single elephant over the last 3-4 years because we are now more visible in the area. We do more patrols, even in areas like Chiretsi, the Southeast Longveld, Bonarejo. We do a lot of awareness, we do a lot of patrols, we do a lot of law enforcement. What is more important is the resources to make sure that we are visible, we are around. We also do a lot of awareness with our community so that they appreciate the importance of wildlife.
Officials say awareness is key to preventing poaching, and Mastic's story is a testament to the power of change and the hope for a future where both people and wildlife can thrive. Rumesa Chodar, Africa Matters.
That's our show this week. Share your thoughts and suggestions about the stories you've seen on this episode, or ideas on what you'd like us to cover on YouTube or on X using the hashtag Africa Matters. Thanks for watching, and it's goodbye from me, Grace Korea Kanter.